Hello and welcome to the channel. For anyone new to this channel, I am the Collaborative Negotiator, professional negotiator of over 10 years of experience, and I like to use this channel to talk about various negotiation concepts and skills. Now there's one thing that you can almost guarantee people will want negotiation or negotiator and negotiation skills, and that is to get them more money. Now I've got to say I'm not that kind of negotiator. That is not what I do. That is not my specialism. But I do know the principles, and I do know the important things to a successful negotiation. And as it so happens, I was having a conversation with someone who runs another YouTube channel, a lovely guy called Pete, who runs a channel called Conversations of Money. So for anyone incidentally in the UK who is interested in getting really good tips on how to do investment and how to manage finances properly, then I do recommend you go onto that channel. So I'll put the link to it in the video description below. But I digress. Pete and I were talking about the cost of living crisis in the UK, which of course is a very significant political issue right now. And I made the joke that as a professional negotiator, it'd always be expected of me to negotiate an above inflation salary increase. Otherwise, how can I justify myself as a professional negotiator if I can't do that? So he did make the point that I actually ought to teach those skills to other people, which of course is what I do on this channel. So that gave me the idea that I would create this video, which I'm hoping is well timed. People facing rising costs will of course have to look at all sorts of means to deal with that. And right now I imagine an awful lot of people are thinking, how do I get more pay? Because that's important, and when inflation is at 5, 7, 10%, whatever it is, more money is crucial. Without it, there's only so much you can cut, you can slim down, and without that increase in money, life is just going to get uncomfortable. Now, the governor for the Bank of England in the UK did say to people that he doesn't want people negotiating salary increases with their employers. And crass, as his comments perhaps were, there is understandable logic behind it. His job is to control inflation. So, of course, on a macroeconomic level, what he does not want is a whole host of people negotiating wage rises with their employers, because of course that creates more inflation in the economy. Well, that's all very well for the the governor of the Bank of England, who's paid a very generous salary. That's not so good for you, the individual. So ignore that. Don't feel that you shouldn't do it. In these sorts of situations, if you can, then you should explore what are the options available to you to increase your salary. And many people find this conversation difficult. It's not they feel it can be confrontational. And it doesn't have to be. There are ways to do that. So let's go right into this. Let's explain how you can negotiate yourself a salary rise. So for starters, it's an obvious thing. Just ask. And that's what many people do. Some people work in industries where that is acceptable and the norm, and that's fine. If that is what happens and that is the culture in where you work, then that is what you can go ahead and do, and you don't have to be aggressive about it. You can literally just go to your boss and say, oh yeah, I fancy a pay rise, what are you going to offer? What's on the cards? My advice to anyone initiating that conversation who perhaps doesn't have that culture, or where it's more difficult to ask for that sort of thing for whatever reason, is to build up to it and to ask a more open question. Because one of the problems is that if you go to your boss and say, give me a pay rise, you're putting them on the spot in a way that strongly encourages them to say no or to push back defensively. So a more open question that says, give me a pay rise, is something on the lines of, yeah, I've done pretty well this year. Inflation's a bit high. I wouldn't mind a pay rise. What are my options? In that. And by asking your boss, what are my options, what can we look at here, you're initiating a conversation, a more open conversation. And of course, on this channel, as the name perhaps implies, I'm all about collaborative negotiation. So if you go up to the boss and you say, give me a pay rise, you're immediately launching into an adversarial style negotiation. You want more money, he doesn't want to give you more money, or he or she, I should say. Whereas by coming at it as a more collaborative way, and a more opening question of what can we do here, you're inviting a more measured response. You're not putting straight on pressure. You're literally saying, I want to have a conversation, I'm curious to hear your opinions on what we can do here. And of course, if you have a good boss, they will go away, speak to their boss, speak to finance or whatever, and try and work through it. Find a good answer. And I'm working here on the assumption that they want to keep you, of course. If they don't want to keep you, for whatever reason, then you're onto a loser straight away. So be aware of that. So what sort of things do you need to have a difficult conversation where you're not certain about the answer, where it's not the culture to just ask for a pay rise? Well, there's two big things you need to think about. First, you need objectives. So what sort of pay rise are you going to be looking for? Are you looking for a 5% pay rise to match inflation, perhaps? Are you looking for something higher? What is it? And you need to have that in mind, because you also need to establish how important is it to you. Because if you're really struggling, because basically, let's be honest, work is not paying you enough, then you're perhaps going to have to set quite high objectives. Maybe. If you feel that's justifiable. But what you also have to understand as part of your objectives, that when you're negotiating, you're not negotiating to get them to agree to give you a pay rise. You're negotiating to achieve something. And what you're seeking to achieve is a pay that you consider perhaps more fair, but a pay that will make your life a little bit easier and perhaps can really change how your life is, how uncomfortable your life is. So in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is that you almost need to have your bottom line. If you absolutely cannot carry on as you are currently being paid, then you need to understand that your current position is untenable, in terms of your pay situation. So your objective needs to be, it is very important for you to get a pay rise that allows you to have a better life. And if your current employer is not going to meet that request, then you need to think of an alternative means to achieve that outcome. That's your objective. Negotiation is a tool by which you might achieve that outcome, and it doesn't always succeed. But other options might succeed, and so you need to think your way through that. So part of the objective setting, you might have some aspirational target. You might say, really what, I fancy 10%. That actually is fair for various reasons. I'll come on to that in a little bit. But my minimum might be 5%. And so you can go with it. Now, I'm not an advocate of going out and setting unrealistically high targets. If you do that in form of negotiation, then you undermine your position. You come across as a bit of an idiot, quite frankly. So you need to have an opening request that is realistic and defendable. So your objectives need to be realistic and defendable. You need to be able to justify what it is you're asking for. Which comes me to the second thing that you need: information. Why should you have a pay rise? Well, of course, you might think inflation. You might think you deserve it. You might think that your pay has fallen below industry standards. And if you can gather lots of evidence that proves that your pay is below industry standards, then that is evidence you need. So that is information you need to make available to your boss as part of your conversation. But more than that, there's other bits of information that you require. You need to understand the position that your boss or your company or your organization is in. Do they have the money? Do they have the ability to change pay scales? Because if you work in a very large organization, then your boss, for example, has no ability whatsoever, perhaps, to change your pay scales. Some organizations are structured that way, and quite deliberately. So this is additional information that you need to understand what is within your boss's or with your employer's ability to control. Because if you set unrealistic objectives and ask for things that they simply cannot give you, then that is not really a negotiation that's going to go anywhere. So both objectives and information are important as part of the preparation for asking for a pay rise. So you've done your objective setting, you've gathered the information that you require. So how do we have that difficult conversation where you go to your boss and say, I think I deserve more money? I've talked about this already in a way. And the word that we use in negotiation circles is preconditioning. So what that means is you lay the groundwork. So you can have a friendly, completely negotiation type conversation with your boss and saying, oh yeah, I'm just seeing all these job offers for people who have skills, and wow, don't they pay a lot these days? So that's preconditioning. You've dropped a very unsubtle hint to your boss that you're not being paid enough, and you could be paid if you went elsewhere. You could be paid more. Because, of course, what your company has done is lowered the pay compared to industry. So that's preconditioning. That's putting that information to use and weaponizing it for your benefit. You also need to create the right atmosphere. And I talk about that in negotiations a lot because it's important, especially in the collaborative negotiation. So having preconditioned your boss into understanding that you feel you're underpaid, you need to get them to agree with that. And it doesn't have to be a just pay me more type conversation. It can literally be, yeah, what do you think of this information? What do you think about the fact that, we seem to have fallen behind as an organisation? That can't be good for the health of the organisation. Also, inflation is going to be really high this year. What is the organisation going to be, if that's something not the organisation should take seriously? Your boss will probably be in the same position. So they might even agree with you. So regardless of whether they can agree to your request for a pay rise or not, the first step is you get them to agree with you on those core principles, on the fact that you should be paid more and that inflation is going to change again, for example. And having got your boss to agree with you that, that is the case, then of course it is much easier to say, okay, to have that open question. What are you going to do? What is the organisation going to do to remedy this situation? And if they're a good boss, they'll go away, they'll look at it and try and give you an answer. Hopefully, it might be the answer you're hoping for. It might even be a compromise offer. So on that point, don't just think about the price. Don't just think about the money. This comes back to my point of what is it they can and cannot control. Your boss may have no ability whatsoever to give you more money. That may be an organizational reality, and you can rail them back against the trend all you want. If that's the reality, then you have to try and manage it. But there may be other things your boss can offer you, and I don't know what they might be, but it could be benefits. There could be share options. There could be a better company car scheme. There could be better allowances. There's a whole host of other things that normally decent employers tend to offer their employees. So if they can't give you more money, then what other non-money related things, non-direct money related things perhaps, can they give you? And those things can be useful. At the end of the day, let's say you increase your salary by £1,000 or not. But let's say that instead of giving you the money, the company perhaps offers you a car allowance or some other kind of allowance worth £2,000. What are you going to take? Are you going to take the money in the pocket, or are you going to take the allowance? So don't be afraid to initiate a conversation when you understand that money perhaps is not on the table, to then ask, well, what other things are on the table? What other benefits can you give me? And in many cases, you tend to find that people have more flexibility to negotiate around the issue of money than do the money itself. And my final point here, I am not at all an advocate of making threats. So never have this sort of conversation where you say, give me a pay rise or I leave. You don't need to say that. It's hostile, it's adversarial, and actually it worsens your case. It doesn't improve it. So I'm never a fan of doing anything like that. Be more subtle about it. As I say, if you've already told your organisation, your employer, that other people in the industry at the same level as you are paid more, that itself is the threat. You do not need to go any further than that. By the same token, don't also try and put unrealistic positions up front, to try and make them compromise down to your objective target. So in other words, don't demand ridiculous amounts of pay increase, because that itself is also perceived as a threat, as well as undermining the credibility of your position. So I'm not a big fan of that at all either. Now, of course, it doesn't matter how well you prepare, it doesn't matter how good you do, it doesn't even matter how good a relationship you have with your boss. Sometimes the answer is just going to be no. And you need to understand the reasons for that no. It may just literally be that your boss does agree with you, does think you should have a pay rise, but finance said no, and your boss has no ability to maneuver around that. So what do you do about that sort of situation? Well, you have three choices really. First is you can accept it. You can accept that you did your best, you tried to get a pay rise, but the reality is it's just not happening. The organisation doesn't have the money, not very friendly, whatever it may be. And there's not much else. There's no point arguing about it. There's no point making life difficult for yourself as a consequence of that conversation and getting the answer. If you're really unhappy with that rejection, and if you feel that it is important to get that pay rise, then you have to be prepared for the fact that the answer may be no. And you have to have your alternative plan. What happens if the answer is no? That could mean that you genuinely do leave the organisation. If you are highly skilled and very transferable, and if other people in industry are genuinely paying more than your company is, well, there's the answer in itself. You leave. You go, you apply for those jobs, you go to the interviews, and then, you hand in your notice. And your boss probably won't even be surprised. Your boss will say, yeah, I saw that one coming. And they will feel frustrated. And this is an assumption that you're a good worker and they wanted to keep you. They will feel that loss, and they will communicate that up to the organisation. That doesn't benefit you. But that is something you need to consider if you genuinely want a pay rise and you need to keep on going. You can't just accept the rejection. If you can't accept the rejection, then that has to be your plan B. But there's another option as well, and I call this the go evil plan. Let's talk a bit more about that. When I say go evil, what I mean is you're going to be doing something that is very risky and underhand. And there's a high risk that this could backfire badly on you. So I do not at all condone anything illegal or immoral in the context of this strategy. I am talking about approaching the problem from a different angle, and perhaps using more underhand techniques in order to secure what you want. So what I mean by that, I call it negotiating without negotiation. So you've had your no, so you can't apply any further pressure back through your boss to get paid more. So there's other means by which you can do that. You can speak to your union, for example. As union is a union thing, and collective bargaining is a big thing. There are people that would do that negotiation for you. What they need is your vote and your support. Now, I've done a separate video on collective bargaining, and I post a link to that in the video description below, or if you want to check it out, and some of the reasons or how that can work, and some of my criticisms of how unions conduct negotiations, but I digress a bit. But the point is that you're using an external organisation or agency that can apply pressure for you. You're not directly negotiating. Now, the union, of course, is the legitimate and the obvious way to do it. But there are perhaps some less legitimate and less obvious ways to do so as well. So let's imagine, for example, that you work for an organisation that is in the public eye. So another way that you can apply external pressure is go to the media. There could be a news story in it. You can, and perhaps getting even more evil, you can be working for an organisation that you feel has some very bad practices for its employees, perhaps some almost illegal practices, and they don't treat their employees well. So in that sort of scenario, you can whistleblow. And yes, you should always be whistleblowing for the purposes of revealing an injustice and things that's going wrong. But actually, it is also well known that people will whistleblow for the purposes of forcing change in the organisation, perhaps including salary increases. Now, why you have to be careful here is that if you're the one doing it and you're seen as the one creating the trouble, then of course you are undermining your position. No one likes a backstabber or troublemaker in the organisation, especially if that person's actually right and revealing things that genuinely are wrong in that organisation. So what you need to do here is really have a very careful strategy of presenting information to external people who will use that information to pressurize the leadership of your organisation. And by doing this, you're actually undermining them. And you're undermining their position. And that creates problems for them. That creates tension. It puts pressure on them. And when you do that sort of thing, it can create the scenario where you're better able, or your union perhaps, is better able to apply pressure for fairer pay increases and so on. Like I said, this is a very underhand tactic, and no one should go into this and not understanding that it is not always, it's very unlikely to fail, it's very high risk, and it could easily backfire on them. But it can be exceedingly effective if you're really clever about how you do this. What you're doing is you're creating pain for the people who have rejected your request for a pay increase. Does it feel a bit like vengeance? Yes, it does. But it is a tactic. It's a very politically known type of tactic to do to undermine your opponents. And not, of course, that I endorse such a thing, but let's be honest, that is sort of what unions exist to do in certain contexts. So my final thoughts for anyone trying to negotiate that pay rise. Understand your true worth. How valuable are you to your organisation really? Are you a good worker? Are you underpaid in comparison to your peers? Do you have skills that are very difficult to replace? Now, the answer to all those questions may be yes. And you may feel that it's an overwhelming case for you to have a pay rise. But there are no guarantees. Organisations do not always make rational decisions based on evidence and overwhelming cases. They can quite often make irrational decisions. So even though you may be completely in the right, they may insist on being completely in the wrong. But it is important that you understand going into any negotiation or any request for a pay rise what what the evidence is that supports your case, and also what the evidence is against your case. So do that assessment, understand those factors. So you also need to understand what your boss can and can't control. If they have no ability to get more money to pay you more, is it even worth asking? Should you perhaps just consider the fact, well, you're stuck with what it is, and either you stay there because you like your boss, you like the organisation, you like the people you work with, or you leave. And that sometimes is a binary choice. You sometimes, in doing your calculation, doing your analysis in terms of asking for a pay rise, it is perfectly valid, I would argue, as a negotiation strategy, for you to come to the conclusion that negotiation is pointless. There literally is no value in doing so, and that really you need to seek an alternative strategy. If that is the case, then what you have done is prepared properly for a negotiation. So the negotiation, in a sense, has succeeded by giving you an answer, even if that's not the answer you want. So, of course, that leads me to the final point: have a plan B. You may think you have a realistic crack, you may turn out not to. So is your plan B, yeah, you had a go, but actually you want to stay there? Or is your plan B, I should look for alternative employment? And when you have all those things in your mind, when you understand your worth, what's available to you, and what you can and can't do, then it makes it a lot easier to go ahead and ask for that pay rise, to have that difficult conversation, safe in the knowledge that you've prepared for it well, rather than making the mistake that many people go, which is just going unprepared straight to the boss and saying, oh, come on, I really fancy a pay rise. So without that preparation, you don't have that, that strength of conviction, that strength of argument. So I hope you found this video helpful. I should wish you the best of luck in any negotiation that you might have. A strong final caveat, I've given you this information to help you, and but it doesn't matter how well you use it or how good you are. There is no guarantee of success. Even the best of negotiators can't necessarily get themselves an inflation-beating pay rise. But I wish you the best of luck if you're in that position, and I would encourage you to apply these principles to try and approach that conversation with your boss, with your organisation, in a collaborative manner, and that hopefully that will improve the odds of you getting the pay rise that you no doubt deserve. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any suggestions or comments in the comment box below.